I mean, it's a researched fact that if you have the wrong people around you, you are far more compromised.
There you go.
You are not going to be happy.
There you go.
Period.
Yeah.
So really look at who's around you. And of course, we can't choose our family, and we might be in places where we have to deal with difficult colleagues. You're just going to have to limit those interactions, and you're going to resource up before you go in front of those people.
Yes.
But who are your people that you go to, where you are in your pajamas, and you can just be like, hey, listen, I just want to talk, and hey, why don't you come hang out and let's have a burger? Like, it's not about what you do. It's just you're hanging out and being with those people,
right?
And they're being with you. You are supporting them, and they are supporting you.
Hello, and welcome back to our regular listeners, and welcome aboard to any new listeners joining us today for the first time. This is your Tell Me Why podcast, which is a Gulf News original podcast. And in this podcast, for those of you who don't know, we discuss a wide range of topics. So we do health and well-being, we do social topics, and we recently launched a mini-series within the podcast called Get to Know the CEO, which is a bit more business related. Now, in doing so, we bring in the experts to answer your questions, hence Tell Me Why. We like to dig deeper. We like to get you the answers that you don't necessarily find either on the internet or by asking a friend. Now, without further ado, joining me in the studio today is Dr. Saliha Afridi, who is a clinical psychologist and the managing director of the Lighthouse Arabia, which is a health and wellness clinic here in Dubai. Is that correct?
That's right.
All
it's
right.
nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. How are you doing? How was your way in? How's everything?
Good.
Yeah?
Cannot complain. Thank you.
Well, that's good. That's good. So, Dr. Saleha, today we're going to be discussing a topic that I think a lot of people can relate to. I think there are going to be a lot of light bulbs, with people listening to this specific podcast episode. We're going to be discussing stress and anxiety. And I think a lot of people group these two together, but they don't know that, okay, they do have similarities, but they're different. But before we dive into that, I want to get to know you first, and we want our audience to get to know you first. So tell us about yourself. Tell us about your specialty. Like, do you specialize in a certain, area of psychology, and what got you into psychology?
Oh, that's a really long story. So I'll just say that I followed the feeling, I followed the heart, and it led me into psychology. And I always say that if the feeling leads me elsewhere, I will go elsewhere. But it has not yet. And it's been now 20 years that I've been in this space.
Wow.
So a long time, a lifetime and more, that I have been a psychologist. I'm also the founder, managing director of the Lighthouse Arabia, which is the mental health clinic and well-being clinic in Dubai. We have 2 branches, and we're one of the largest clinics in the region of psychologists. So I feel very proud of the work that we do. I'm a mother of 4 children.
Wow.
And 3 of them are teenagers, an 18-year-old, a 16-year-old, 14-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And I love them. And they drive me crazy. And that's how
as
that
kids
works.
should, yes.
As they should.
Yes, exactly.
It's part of their job description, and it's part of mine to deal with it.
Yeah.
And then I also live with my parents, and I live within like a community with my brother. And so it's quite a full house at work as well as with my family. So I am very familiar with stress and knowing how to manage that, especially, I think things really got turned up quite a lot after the pandemic. Working women, just women in general, working mothers. I have felt it all, been through it all while I was coaching people through it. So It's been full on.
So your personal experience sort of fed into your professional, career. You basically could relate, and you could use that to help you with your patients, I guess.
I am one of everyone.
Okay.
What everyone is going through, I am going through.
Yeah.
It's just that I might know ways that work for me, or I might be a bit more attuned to it, because that is just what I've done as a skill, is become quite attuned to the emotions, be attuned to the body. But for sure, this psychologists struggle, and I am not different from any other human being, for sure.
Of course.
And it does inform my practice. If I say, okay, well, if I'm feeling this, then there must be someone else that also is feeling this.
Precisely.
And most likely people are.
Of course, yeah. And there are so many moments in our life where we mention something and then you find 3 other people in the same sitting going, oh my gosh, I also experienced this. And that sort of gives you that confirmation that we are all human. We all go through similar, challenges and obstacles through life.
Yes.
All right. So you did mention that we, coping mechanisms and like the way around it, basically. We're going to get into that. But before we do, because we were discussing this before the show, and I think a lot of people confuse the two, stress and anxiety. So if we could maybe just define what each is and what the difference is between the two.
Sure. So stress is when the external demands outweigh your internal resources. So that's when you are stressing the system. Not all stress is bad. Some stress is actually good for you. So when you are running on the treadmill, you are activating the stress response in your body. And that is a good thing, because it is then when you stress the system, then the system says, okay, I've got to now meet that demand. And that's how you grow. And that's how you expand your abilities, whether it's physical strength or mental strength. You do have to put a little bit of pressure or a little bit of stress onto that system in order for that system to then expand beyond what it is comfortable with. So you think about your comfort zone as having no stress, but you think about your growth zone as having some stress, but you are able to meet those demands and adapt, and then push yourself out and then meet those demands and adapt. Anxiety is, we all have anxiety, and you can think about anxiety on a spectrum. There is low anxiety to no anxiety, and that is not necessarily helpful when you actually need anxiety. So think about someone who has no anxiety. They wouldn't make it in this world. They wouldn't be able to perform on their school exams. They wouldn't be able to perform on their work interview. They wouldn't show up to a podcast prepared. They wouldn't care because they have no anxiety. So anxiety is this feeling that I have to prepare myself, or I have to, when I think about something in the future, that makes me prepare. That could be anxiety. Okay. So anxiety is a result of thoughts that you have about an experience. It's not fear. Fear is where I see danger in my environment and I have the full fight or flight response. Anxiety is where I think about something and it activates enough fight or flight response where it gets me mobilized. So think about it as a mobilizing response. Now, too much anxiety and you are now going to be flooded. If you stay in that space, it could be a clinical disorder where you are being diagnosed with anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety, phobia. Then you have too much. You don't want too little. You don't want too much. You just want enough where it mobilizes you and makes you prepared. If I did not have anxiety during COVID, I would be going around hugging people, high-fiving people at a time where we were in an environment where we needed to protect ourselves. So, but if I had too much anxiety, I would lock myself up in my room and I would never come out. That's the difference between having no anxiety, too much anxiety, and then having just enough anxiety. So anxiety is a healthy thing if it is managed. Stress is a healthy thing if it is managed. Now, internally, the fight or flight response is the same. So we have a same response. You come and tell me there's a deadline. You got to meet it by 4 p.m. today. Immediately, the stress response, which is the fight or flight response, kicks on.
Right.
Oh my God, what do I have to do? What do I have to reschedule? How am I going to shift things? How am I going to show up for this? So I'm mobilized now to do that. That is the fight or flight response. Now, when you kick on that fight or flight response, certain things happen in the body. Brain communicates to the certain organs. They release certain chemicals. I'm not going to get too technical, but two of them being adrenaline and cortisol that kicks on certain things. Now, cortisol goes and says, all right, listen, digestive system, I don't need you. Reproductive system, I don't need you. Others, immunity, I don't need you. I need all the energy to be mobilized for us to complete this task. The liver starts to break down the glycogen into glucose. That, all of these things start to happen where it says, all right, all engines go. You've got to meet this demand. And that's what is a good thing. We want to be pushed out. That actually strengthens us. Now, when it becomes problematic is when that stress goes on.
Exactly.
And on. And on. Because it was that precise stress response that allowed us to survive on this rotating planet in the middle of the universe through, in the jungle, through the desert, all of these, in the savannah. That is exactly what we needed. We needed that little bit of anxiety. We needed that fight or flight response to be able to say, hey, what went wrong yesterday? We've got to make sure that doesn't happen today. Right. And so we needed some of that. And that's why we still have the fight or flight response. But now, instead of fighting that bear, we are fighting the demands of life, or that boss that might be too demanding, or the mother-in-law, or.
Yes.
So that would be the stress and anxiety. The internal fight or flight response is the same. Stress is usually to an external demand. Anxiety is usually as a result of a thought that is then kicking on that fight or flight.
Amazing. Thank you for getting into the technical side of it, because that was actually my next question. I wanted to get into the scientific aspect of it. I wanted to know what happens neurologically, like when someone feels stressed or anxious, and what happens physically. Are there any physical, implications on the body when it's too much, as you mentioned? So if you could mention like a couple of, physical symptoms that might appear as a result of the anxiety or stress.
Well, the research shows that over 80% of our health issues, anything, take from cardiac issues to diabetes, to respiratory issues, to GI tract issues, to hair loss, to acne, to loss of libido, any of these issues, over 80, close to 90%, are going to be a result of stress. So
that's shocking.
Basically everything that you can think of.
Yeah.
Because what people say, well, no, I have a genetic predisposition to diabetes. Let's take diabetes, for example. I have a genetic predisposition. The research now finds through epigenetics that the epigenetics research shows that we all carry the gene. Some of us you might carry the diabetes gene, I might carry the diabetes gene, so does my sister, and we are carrying this gene. Our lifestyle, i.e. stress, is going to be the one that turns on that gene.
It's like a trigger.
It's the trigger. So it's called the stress diathesis model. That there must be enough stress onto the system that certain genes get unlocked, and that disease is then triggered. So my sister could have diabetes and me not. Why? We both carry the gene. It's just that I have a lifestyle that protects against certain conditions. So any of these medical conditions you can trace back to stress onto the system. But if on the day-to-day psychological things like racing mind, rapid heart rate, breathing heavily, sweaty arms, this physiological, not psychological, physiological response would be that. Yes. Cognitively, we can't concentrate, we can't think straight, we feel we can't organize our thoughts. Psychologically, we might start to get really narrow in our aperture. Now we only start to see the problems, because that's what happens when you're stressed. you literally become like this. Your aperture has to narrow, because in your body, the fight or flight response, which is our survival response, has kicked on. And we're not looking around to see, all the beautiful things that are, let me look at these flowers, or let me look at that picture. No. It actually narrows, and it only starts to focus on the problem. So you become a lot more problem focused. You start to withdraw from people. You start to isolate yourself. You start to get really hard on yourself. All of these things could be a result of stress.
Of course.
Eventually, you stay with stress. It becomes chronic. Chronic stress eventually results in burnout. Burnout eventually could result in neurological and structural brain changes that could then result in depression, anxiety, and other mental health difficulties.
Right. Okay, so if I'm listening to this today and I think, okay, maybe sometimes this gets out of hand, what are some coping mechanisms? So you were saying that anxiety and stress can be good for a person if there's a good balance of them both. So what happens if I can't control it? What if I reach that danger zone?
Yeah, it is a danger zone. That's when you know that the demands of your life are over exceeding your resources.
Right.
We all have resources. And there are things that give us energy all day long. I could have a cup of tea. I could have a good phone call. I could see a funny meme on social media. These are like little drops into our pool of resources. And then there are things that are depleting us. The thing that we didn't speak about, Maria, is actually, it's not the big stress. It's actually the little stress that we need to have on our radar, which most people don't have on their radar.
Interesting. Big stress, little stress. That's new.
There is a capital S stress, and then there is a little s stress.
Okay.
And the capital S stress we get geared up for. If I'm going in to have a difficult conversation with a colleague or a boss or a family member, I'm gearing up. I'm resourcing up. I'm going to go ground myself. I'm going to go soothe myself, and then I go in. But it's the little stress all day long. Small chip, chipping away at us, that it doesn't even make it on the fight or flight radar. It actually isn't turning on that adrenaline response. It isn't turning on that cortisol. It's slowly wearing us down.
Yes.
And that's the stuff that most people miss. And that's the stuff that most people actually then finally end up sort of collapsing under. So think about this as like, it's not the earthquake, it's the wind wearing down the mountain.
Right.
You wouldn't even notice it.
Yeah.
But it's happening. It could be something as small as that every time you go home, someone is in your parking spot.
Oh.
It's that.
Okay.
And you're like, okay. And then you have to go find another one.
And you brush it off every single time.
Or your kids don't go to bed when you tell them to. Or the toothpaste, your partner doesn't put the toothpaste lid on. It's the small things that are wearing us. And people say don't sweat the small stuff, because it really is small. But unless you're really not sweating the small stuff and you found a way to just not do that, if it's bothering you, those small bothers are depleting you.
Yeah.
So either find a way to not be bothered, but if you're dismissing them like, we do this and we do that, no. That's the stuff that eventually is going to break the camel's back.
Oh, man.
So how do you cope was the question?
Exactly.
The coping would be go to the small stuff. Where is it slowly chipping away at you? And where can you add things in your day that actually could be fueling you? So what you want is you want to keep resourcing up throughout the day and limiting the chippers, the chipping away.
Yeah.
So that's how we want to balance that out. So do that. Now, even when you do that, there will be some people who now are too far deep in. Now it's affecting their work. It's affecting their personal life. It's affecting the way they parent. It's affecting the way they show up in the world. Get professional help.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It only gets bigger. And then you start to do things like numbing behaviors or activities. You start to self-medicate using substances or using processes like shopping or eating or drinking or smoking. We start to do some of this stuff because we just want to take the edge off.
Yeah.
And that edge, that's when it starts to get dangerous. So if you start to find yourself feeling overwhelmed, and we all can feel so overwhelmed that we can't see clearly.
Right.
It's too close to our face at this point. Get professional help. You're not going to be in therapy forever. Don't worry. You can just go in there and say, hey, listen, I'm here to learn some coping skills. I'm here to address the issues that are my small s and my big S stress. I'm here to learn how to resource up. I'm here to learn strategies. And if you do that, you can be out of there 8 to 12 sessions.
Yeah.
So it can get very practical in the therapy room. There are some therapists who don't do it that way. I do more insight-oriented work. I don't work with people that are very symptomatic.
Okay.
So there's different types of therapy, but there is very strategies-based, technical, practical therapy that you can get in order for you to learn ways to cope with that. So I would say get professional help.
I'm just so glad that you mentioned that people are sort of like escaping the stress and trying to, let it out either through retail therapy, is what we call retail therapy, when we overshop or eat, or let out that stress by overeating. I think I did go through a time in my life where I was suppressing it. I was trying to escape it in any way. So distracting myself with a sport or a new activity or a hobby, trying to learn something new, thinking that was the right way to deal with it, when actually I was just, it was just piling up inside me. But then, you get other people saying, but you need an outlet. So it's okay for me to go and, let's say, release that stress by going swimming, for instance. What would you say to those people, who say, but I need the outlet? So would you say that it doesn't contradict the coping mechanisms, it complements it, but you still have to address them?
Precisely.
Okay.
2 words, and also. Make them your best friend. And also.
Right.
You cannot deny. You must also. And also, I will go swimming, and I will also journal and think through this. I will get a new hobby, and I will also go to therapy and do the hard work. It cannot all be positive.
Right.
I watch Netflix, and there are days where I'm like, today is going to be one of those days. I ain't moving out of my pajamas, and I'm going to lay in bed.
Yeah.
And also, tomorrow, I will get to this.
Right.
So it's never one thing. And what works for you is not going to work for me. And what works for him is not going to work for her. So it's really important that you think, okay, well, what works for me? I need to keep putting things in that give me energy. And I need to keep taking things out that I need to be addressing. So think about that as a balance that you need to meet inside of you. If you deny, distract, escape, numb, any of these things, it gets bigger. That's the problem. Most people think that, well, let me just put that away and it will go away.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even stay the same. It gets bigger. That's the problem. And then when you actually do have to confront it, it is so big that you feel very small and overwhelmed by it.
Of course. It's like an open wound. You keep ignoring it and you don't disinfect it. It's just going to get worse and worse and could lead to other, complications. So you're absolutely right. But then when is too much stress? I don't know how to ask that, but when is it too much stress? What if I feel helpless? I've had friends who've been so overwhelmed and so stressed that they can't even get up and get the help they need.
Yeah.
So what do you do in situations like that? What's the responsibility of maybe their family and friends? And how do you get them to listen? Because at that point, they're just closed off. Like they are in their bubble. They don't want to listen. They're overwhelmed. They feel like that's it. Like that's the end. I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, as they say. So what do you do in situations like that?
I think in that situation, eliminate the burden on them. Do whatever you can. If it's thinking about what they're going to eat for that week, just say, I've got the meal plans. You don't have to worry about that. I'll pick up the dry cleaning. I got the kids. At that point, what you want to do is you want to give them some relief from the things that are the small S's in their life. Right. You might not be able to tell them what to do with the big S that they might be contending with, but deal with all the little S's that you can deal with. And hopefully that person has people in their life who are first aiders, mental health first aiders. They are responders. They are part of their tribe that says, I've got you. And I can see that you're really overwhelmed. I'm even going to pick out your outfits for the week. It's on this rack. You don't even have to think about it. Just put those on. Like, it's these small things that, that really, really break us eventually. So eliminate as much as you can. That's what I would say. I would also say to those people that are in this person's life is... help them find the therapist. Do the homework. When I have to call 18 clinics and everyone is fully booked, or I can't find the right person, or I don't want to find the research, I'm already...
That's already stressful.
That's it. Like, it's too much for me.
Yeah.
So do the work for them. Find the therapist for them. Book the appointment for them. Drive them to the appointment if you can. Sit with them for the appointment.
Right.
That's how you say, I've handled all of it. All you got to do is show up. And I've done that for people for mental health appointments, but also for physical health appointments. Like, you don't even have to think about it because the feeling feels so big that you just are overwhelmed with that feeling, and then you're just almost shell-shocked. And you move into what is considered the dorsal response, which is we all human beings have a fight or flight response, but we also have this immobilized. There's a mobilized and immobilized. So it's almost like the play dead. So in the jungle, you will see that animals will either fight, they will run, or they will play dead. And because, oh my God, it's too big, play dead and hope that he will not smell me or hear me or breathe. That playing dead is what most people, when they shut down, they've gone into an immobilized response, which is also called the dorsal vagal response. And that literally shuts them down. What we want to do is we will slowly want to remove things off of them so they can move back into the fight or flight response, where they will then be activated.
So they don't
to do
feel
something.
like they're in so much danger that they can't move.
They literally can't move.
Okay.
Because sometimes you look at people and you're like, hello, do you not see this? Why aren't you doing something about this? They're shut down. It's a trauma response. They're actually flooded in that moment. I've seen kids, I've seen men, I've seen women, all ages, all stages, literally flooded, where their frontal lobe is shut down, they're shut down, and they are like, I actually don't know what to do.
I'm so overwhelmed. I can't even think straight.
And what you are just saying, just pick up this. That's all you have to do. And they're like, I can't. I don't even I don't even know what that's going to do to me. I don't know. I can't do it.